Given the shortage of logical thinking and the fact that mankind is adrift, if not sinking, it is vital that all of us learn to think straight. I think that quote perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
So we are diving into Being Logical, A Guide to Good Thinking by D.Q. McInerny.
Dennis McInerny.
We're going to try to unpack some of the foundational principles of logic as he lays them out and see how we can apply them to sharpen our own thinking.
Sounds good.
So, one of the things that struck me early on in the book is that Dennis emphasizes logic as more than a set of, abstract rules. He's really presenting it as a way of interacting with the world around us.
Right. He's very big on this idea of attentiveness, which is really about, being present in a situation, paying attention to details.
So are we talking about mindfulness here?
It's definitely connected because, Dennis points out that we often kind of skim over details, assuming we know what's going on, but that can lead us to miss really crucial information.
Like we think we have the gist.
Exactly. Have you ever had that experience where you jumped to a conclusion?
Oh, all the time.
Only to realize later you had missed a key piece of information.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a lack of attentiveness at play.
I get what you mean. It's like when you think you know a shortcut, but you end up getting lost because you didn't pay attention to the sign.
Precisely. And this ties into, the importance of getting the facts straight, which Dennis, he makes this distinction between subjective and objective facts.
Okay.
Subjective facts are personal, your feelings, your opinions, your experiences. Objective facts exist independently of your perception.
Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say you see a car speeding down the street.
Okay.
You might feel that the driver is reckless, right?
Yeah.
That's your subjective interpretation. But the objective fact is the car's speed, which can be measured.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. So even our personal experiences,
right,
which we might consider facts, can actually be subjective.
Precisely. We might misremember details or let our emotions color our perceptions. So it's important to be critical even of our own experiences.
Okay.
And ask, is this really how it happened? Or is my perception skewed?
So we need to be careful about mistaking our opinions for objective truth.
And that leads to the bigger point Dennis makes, that all of our ideas originate from the objective world.
Okay.
If our observations are flawed, our conclusions will be too.
So it goes back to the attentiveness.
Exactly.
And really being sure of what we're seeing before we start drawing conclusions.
It's like building a building. If the foundation is weak, the whole structure is compromised.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So we've got attentiveness, we've got objective facts.
Right.
He also talks quite a bit about the importance of language.
He does. He calls language a bridge between minds.
I like that.
If we want to communicate clearly, which is essential for logical thinking, we have to choose our words carefully. Vague language leads to misunderstandings.
Can you give me an example of that?
Imagine you're describing a chair. If you just say chair, it could mean any type of chair. But if you say antique rocking chair with a floral pattern, it creates a much clearer picture in the listener's mind.
That's so true. We often take for granted how much precision is needed in our language.
And Dennis goes on to highlight other aspects of clear communication.
Okay.
Like speaking in complete sentences, avoiding double negatives, and distinguishing between facts and opinions. It all comes down to being mindful of how we use language.
It's like learning a new language, but the language is logic.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And once we've prepared our minds in this way, Dennis introduces us to the basic principles of logic.
Okay, let's go there.
He outlines 4 core principles: the principle of identity, the principle of the excluded middle, the principle of sufficient reason, and the principle of contradiction. Okay,
those sound like, I don't know, the fundamental building blocks of logical thinking.
They are. The principle of identity states that a thing is what it is. The principle of the excluded middle says something either is or is not. There's no in between. The principle of contradiction states that something can't both be and not be at the same time.
So these are about establishing the basic rules of existence and reality.
Exactly. But the principle that Dennis really digs into is the principle of sufficient reason. This principle says that everything has an explanation, a cause, a reason for being the way it is.
That sounds pretty profound. Can you elaborate on that?
So Dennis gives this great example. Think of it this way. You smell something bad in your kitchen. You might find a bucket of dirty water and empty it. Problem solved, right?
It is like it.
But the principle sufficient reason says you need to find the source of that bad smell.
Okay.
Maybe a leaky pipe.
Yeah.
You have to address the root cause, not just the symptom.
That's a great analogy. So often we just settle for quick fixes instead of digging deeper to understand why things are the way they are.
And that's what this principle encourages us to do.
Okay.
To seek explanations.
Mm.
To understand the why behind things.
Mm-hmm.
It's about moving from passive acceptance to active inquiry.
Okay, so we've prepared our minds.
Right.
We understand these basic principles.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put logic into action?
That's where argument comes in. Dennis calls it the language of logic.
Okay.
It's how we demonstrate the truth of something, how we provide reasons for our beliefs.
I think a lot of people, when they hear the word argument,
Yeah.
they think of like a shouting match.
Right.
Not necessarily a logical process.
Yeah, that's a common misconception. Logical arguments are about presenting reasoned evidence to support a claim. And Dennis talks about, how arguments are made up of statements and the importance of moving from universal statements to particular ones.
Okay.
For example, all cats are mammals, therefore some cats are mammals.
That seems pretty obvious.
It is, but the key concept here is necessitation.
Okay.
If the universal statement is true,
Okay.
if all cats are mammals, then it absolutely follows that some cats are mammals.
Okay.
The conclusion is unavoidable.
So we're starting to see how logic can lead to certain knowledge.
Exactly. And Dennis introduces the syllogism as this kind of classic example of a logical argument. It's a structure with two premises and a conclusion that inevitably follows from those premises.
Okay.
The classic example is, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal.
That's very clear and concise.
It's the gold standard of logical argument. But Dennis also cautions that an argument is only as good as the truth of its premises.
Right.
If you start with faulty information, even the most airtight logic won't lead you to the truth.
So it all circles back to that attentiveness.
Yes.
And getting the facts straight.
Oh, exactly. It's like a chain. Each link has to be strong for the whole thing to hold. And now, Dennis brings up something we can all relate to. The sources of illogical thinking.
Yeah.
He points out that we all make logical mistakes from time to time.
We're all human.
Exactly. But he identifies certain attitudes and viewpoints that can lead to faulty reasoning. And he starts with skepticism. Okay.
So isn't skepticism a good thing? Like questioning assumptions and demanding evidence?
There's a healthy skepticism for sure, but Dennis is talking about a more radical form of skepticism that says there is no truth or that truth is unattainable.
Okay, so how does that lead to illogical thinking?
If you fundamentally doubt the possibility of truth, then there's no point in reasoning.
Right.
Logic is all about discovering and articulating truth.
So extreme skepticism can actually paralyze our ability to think logically.
That's Dennis's point.
Right.
And he also touches on other pitfalls like narrow-mindedness.
Okay.
Refusing to consider other viewpoints and letting emotions dominate our arguments. We've all been there, right?
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment.
Right.
And just let emotions cloud your judgment.
It happens. But being aware of these tendencies is the first step in overcoming them.
Sure.
And this leads us to what I find one of the most interesting parts of the book.
Okay.
The principal forms of illogical thinking. What we call logical fallacies.
It's like a rogues gallery of errors in reasoning.
Exactly. And Dennis covers a lot of them, but let's just focus on two for now.
Okay, sounds good.
How about denying the antecedent and equivocation?
Okay, those are good ones.
Yeah, denying the antecedent plays on our assumptions about cause and effect.
Okay.
So the classic example is, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. It's not raining, therefore the ground is not wet.
But the ground could be wet for other reasons.
Right.
Sprinklers, a burst pipe, who knows?
Exactly. The fallacy lies in assuming that first condition, the rain, is the only possible cause for that second condition, wet ground.
It ignores other possibilities.
Right. And then there's equivocation, which is all about using words in different senses to mislead. And Dennis uses this example. He says, a warm beer is better than a cold beer. After all, nothing is better than a cold beer, and a warm beer is better than nothing.
Okay, I see what he's doing there. He's using the word nothing in two different senses.
Right, right.
In the first instance, it literally means nothing.
Yeah.
And in the second, it's like something undesirable.
Exactly. The fallacy lies in shifting the meaning of a word mid-argument.
It's a very sneaky way to trick someone if they aren't paying close attention. So we've learned about the importance of attentiveness,
Right.
getting the facts straight, the basic principles of logic, and even some common logical fallacies.
Mm-hmm.
What does all of this mean for our listeners? How can they apply this knowledge in their own lives?
I think it's about giving us a mental toolkit to navigate the world more effectively.
Yeah, I like that.
You know, Dennis wants us to see logic not as just this abstract exercise, but as a practical skill that we can use every day.
Okay.
Think about a recent decision you made.
Okay.
Did you, really weigh the facts carefully? Or were you swayed by, an emotional appeal or something?
Those are definitely questions we should all ask ourselves more often.
Right.
For sure.
It's about becoming more aware of our own thinking patterns and recognizing those potential pitfalls that Dennis highlights.
So are we all capable of becoming more logical thinkers?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dennis believes that logic is a skill that can be learned and honed with practice.
Right.
It's about cultivating that mindset of attentiveness, demanding evidence, and thinking things through systematically.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people feel like
Right.
they are either logical or they're not. That it's like an innate ability.
Right. Like you're either born with it or you're not.
Yeah.
But it's not like that at all. It's more like a muscle.
Yeah.
It can strengthen over time. And Dennis provides a lot of practical tips and exercises in the book to help with that.
We've only scratched the surface of logical fallacies today.
Right.
Dennis mentions a whole bunch more in the book.
Yeah.
You know, the straw man fallacy, the ad hominem fallacy, the appeal to authority. These are all traps we can fall into if we aren't careful.
And just being aware of them can help us avoid them in our own thinking.
Right.
And spot them in the arguments of others.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world where we're just bombarded with information from all sides.
Absolutely.
It's like having a filter to separate the logical from the illogical.
Exactly.
So what's the core message of being logical? What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think Dennis would say that logic is an essential tool for clear thinking and effective communication.
Yeah.
It's about bringing order to the chaos of information that surrounds us.
In a world overflowing with opinions and agendas.
That ability to think critically and logically is more valuable than ever.
For sure. So if you're interested in exploring this world of logic further, we've included a link to Dennis's book, Being Logical, in the description.
Yeah.
It's a book that can truly change how you approach information.
For sure.
And decision making.
Now that you're more aware of these logical fallacies, how will you approach information differently?
That is a great question.
What will you question?
Yeah.
What will you demand evidence for?
Those are definitely things for all of us to think about.
They are.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into being logical. If you found this deep dive helpful, please like and subscribe to By the Pages for more insightful explorations of the world of ideas.